There's no two ways about it, professional wrestling is a risky sport. Every time a wrestler does step in the ring, you never 100% know what's going to happen, which is why really when all is said and done, we should smile as long as nobody has gone injured. Because yeah, the risks are very real, but as effectively highly trained stuntmen, we always expect the performers in the ring to walk away unscathed from every incident. Thankfully, in the majority of cases, they do. But that's not just limited to the ring. As well as always being a danger within the squared circle, outside of it too, a lot of wrestlers have looked death in the face and luckily been able to tell the tale down the line. Well, that's not really the case here, because I'm going to tell the tale instead. I'm Simon from WhatCulture, and this, yes, is 10 wrestlers who nearly died. Number 10, Tom McGee. Infamous within wrestling thanks to the match he had with Bret Hart that apparently convinced WWE officials he would be the next big thing, Tom McGee's scrap with the Hitman apparently is never going to come to light. It exists somewhere within the Stamford, Connecticut tape library, but we're not allowed to see it. As we know, it didn't work out this way for the protege, and instead he slowly faded away from the industry, never to be heard of again. However, in May 2018, Tom was involved in a very real fight, and it was no laughing matter. The 59-year-old McGee was brutally beaten up by a gang of 6 men outside his home in Los Angeles, suffering a broken jaw, a broken eye socket, and a severe concussion. All of this came about because of a disagreement over a parking spot, and let's face it, there's no need for that at all. 2 men were later arrested for the assault, and some of the witnesses described McGee as being lucky to be alive. Now, I don't want to be too preachy here, but maybe we could all be a little bit nicer to each other. Number 9, R-Truth. While touring with the WWE in 2010, R-Truth suddenly found himself laid up in hospital after experiencing severe convulsions. As it turned out, Truth was suffering from walking pneumonia at the time, a strand of the virus that can go unnoticed but still carry serious consequences. This is why when he began having seizures backstage, colleagues immediately called for help and he was rushed to a local medical facility. When you think about it, Truth was actually massively fortunate to collapse where he did, given that his brain was gradually being starved of oxygen. If this had happened in his locker room or away from somewhere where there was no people, he could have very realistically died. As we know, that wasn't the case, and now he's back on SmackDown continuing to tell Father Time that he don't want none of his Number 8, Ric Flair. It seems crazy to say that a plane crash actually helped with Ric Flair's career, but when you look at all the evidence, it kind of did. Happening on the 4th of October 1975 during a flight from Charlotte to Wilmington, pilot Joseph Farkas miscalculated the distribution of a group of bulky wrestlers after struggling to make takeoff, forcing him to jettison some fuel. This meant as the plane was preparing to land, however, it ran out of said fuel, scraping across a line of trees before plunging into the ground. Flair and the other passengers incredibly escaped with their lives, but unfortunately Farkas was not so lucky. He died in hospital a week later after falling into a coma. Because of these injuries, however, the Nature Boy was forced to dramatically alter his style. His distinct manner of bumping was developed as a consequence of breaking his back here, but he also leaned down given the look that we're more familiar with today. I'm sure Rick had the talent to make his way to the top regardless, but it was these changes that forced him to reinvent himself, and now the rest is history. Number 7, Shane McMahon. We all know that Shane McMahon has no fear. He's thrown himself off so many structures over the years, you can only assume what he has planned for next. Apparently never even breaking into a sweat, this is also true when he's involved in terrifying real-life situations, including a helicopter crash. In July 2017, Shane was en route to visit his family in Long Island when his private aircraft ran into trouble about a mile away from the coast. In an act of pure heroism, the pilot was able to stabilize the helicopter and land it safely in the Atlantic Ocean, and you know who didn't care throughout the whole thing? That's right, Shane McMahon. Every single witness and the emergency responders said that McMahon didn't even blink and was barely shaken at all. What's more important is that everybody walked away from this unscathed, and also that if you're in the McMahon family, testicular fortitude must be genetic. Number 6, Dean Ambrose. As if Dean Ambrose's long-term tricep injury wasn't gnarly enough, he got into further bother when he suffered a serious staph infection post-surgery that was so serious it nearly killed him. Bearing no details as he recounted the ordeal, Ambrose told people that not only was it one nightmare after the other, but he also had to be plugged up to so many antibiotics that he both crapped and puked his pants. I don't know how you puke in your pants, but it doesn't sound very nice. Despite coming perilously close to losing his arm and even worse his life, Ambrose still made an astonishing return in August, and all of this makes it even more inspiring. And on top of that, he was in the best damn shape of his career. Good for you, Dean. Good for you. Number 5, Tyson Kidd. Ultimately, being a professional wrestler saved Tyson Kidd's life, but not before it nearly killed him first. During a dark match opposite Samoa Joe in June 2015, Kidd took an extremely awkward landing bump from his foe's vicious muscle buster and suffered a spinal cord injury. It would require 16 staples, 4 screws, and a rod to fix it. According to surgeons, only 5% of people could have survived such an injury. Owing this miraculous escape to the fact that as a pro wrestler he developed a pretty big neck, not only did Kidd avoid death, but he avoided any permanent long-time damage, although of course it did mean the man had to hang up his boots. This could have been a lot worse, however, and again, thank goodness it wasn't. Number 4, Ric Flair. Again, as the summer of 2017 started to head our way, everybody in the wrestling world began to sweat for a different reason, because Ric Flair had been placed in a medically induced coma after experiencing complications during emergency bowel surgery. According to consultants at the time, they only thought he had a 20% chance of seeing it through. Just as everybody was preparing for the worst, the Nature Boy proved that he was still the master of the last-minute kick-out because he managed to get back on his feet. Coming out of the coma and saying it was the first time in 40 years that he'd actually rested, within a week Flair was back to cutting promos, and he did it all while wearing his signature robe. Although one day Ric Flair will leave us and it will be sad all round, he's absolutely gonna do it on his own terms. Number 3, Jerry Lawler. Anybody that saw the 10th of September 2012 Raw will probably never forget it. During the live broadcast from Montreal, Jerry the King Lawler all of a sudden stopped breathing after competing in a match himself. As we'd learned thanks to broadcasting colleague Michael Cole, he had suffered a massive heart attack. The King was quickly moved backstage where he lay clinically dead for some 20 minutes as EMTs attempted to resuscitate him. Meanwhile, a visibly distraught Cole was left to anchor the show alone as he anxiously awaited news on the health of his close friend and colleague. Despite all this, somehow Cole remained consummately professional, providing updates on Lawler as the night progressed. Lawler survived and did go on to make a full recovery, and there was quite the moment where he did return to Raw and heartily embrace Michael Cole himself. Number 2, Mick Foley. It's probably easier to count the matches where Mick Foley didn't nearly die than the ones in which he did, but that was just the way he liked to approach wrestling. However, there was one particular occasion which came a bit too close for comfort, and for a change, Foley hadn't flung himself into the line of fire. Foley's 1994 match against Vader in Germany is infamous today, as yes, that's when he was Cactus Jack, and had most of his ear ripped off from the side of his face. However, had he not lost this part of his body, he very well could have lost his life instead. While attempting one of those hangman spots in the ropes, Foley quickly realised they'd been excessively tightened and that he couldn't breathe. Realising he'd pass out if he couldn't free himself immediately, Foley, with the referee's assistance, escaped from the grave situation and sacrificed his ear in the process. This is, of course, Mick Foley though, so he refused medical attention until the match was over, and if he hadn't have lost his hearing device, well, who knows what could have happened. Number 1, Bret Hart. The turn of the century was a devastating time for Bret Hart. A year after losing brother Owen in tragic circumstances in 1999, Hart suffered a mule kick to the side of his head from Goldberg, which ended his in-ring career. In 2002, he then received another major blow, which changed his life forever. While out riding his bicycle one day, the Hitman was catapulted over the handlebars after hitting a pothole at high speed. He struck the ground head first, and hospital tests revealed he'd suffered a stroke on the right side of his brain, leaving the left side of his body paralysed. Luckily, Hart avoided any permanent damage, but had to undergo months of physical therapy to restore full mobility. If there was any hope of a wrestling comeback, it ended here, and it ended for good.